Hello everyone and welcome back to Unknown Military History. Today we will be discussing one of the most controversial and infamous wars in history, the Fourth Crusade. While often being overshadowed by the successful First Crusade or the epic Third Crusade, the Fourth Crusade can be remembered as one of the most, if not the most, impactful out of all of the 8 major crusades, not counting the Reconquista or the other European crusades, just the ones targeting the Middle East. This crusade's impacts included the fall of a millennia-old empire, the permanent schism between two churches, a redrawing of Anatolia for the first time in centuries, and the paving of the way for future crusades not in the name of God, but in the name of politics and greed. So without further ado, let me tell you the tale of the Fourth Crusade. But as always, before we get to the main story, we need centuries of context. Typical history moment. When the Roman Emperor Constantine built the city of Constantinople, he moved the capital of the empire there in 303 AD, and it began a new era for the Roman Empire because now the East and not the West was the center of influence. When the Roman Empire was divided after the death of the future Emperor Theodosius the Great by his 2 sons, the Western Roman Empire would go through a state of gradual decline until its fall in 476 AD. However, the Eastern Roman Empire would endure and continue to be a beacon of Roman strength and a defender of Christianity in the East for centuries to come. Under emperors like Justinian the Great, Basil II, or the Komnenoi dynasty, the Eastern Empire went through periods of expansion and reconquering territories it lost over the years. However, by the time of the High Middle Ages, the Eastern Roman Empire had also found itself in decline, and for centuries the empire had been mostly fighting defensive wars against Western European kingdoms and barbarians, Islamic empires in the East, and many others who gradually chipped away at the empire's territory. That, coupled with constant court intrigue and infighting, meant that the Eastern Roman, or Byzantine as we will refer to it, since that's kind of like the common term that they use, the Byzantine Empire basically faced periods of weakness. And despite this, the Byzantine Empire saw itself as a defender of Christendom, the rightful continuation of the ancient Roman Empire, and held the holiest city in Christendom outside of Jerusalem and Rome in the West. Despite this, however, Western Europeans did not always recognize Byzantium's legitimacy due to the East-West Catholic Orthodox schism between the Catholic and, the Eastern Orthodox churches that continues to this day. And in the year 1071, when a Byzantine army was crushed at the Battle of Manzikert by the Seljuk Turks, who had fled into Anatolia in the aftermath of the battle. With the Byzantine Empire on the brink of collapse, its emperor, Alexios I Komnenos, petitioned the help of the Pope, Urban II, who would convene the First Crusade. And the First Crusade was actually really successful because Crusaders from all around Europe signed up and managed to help the Byzantines reconquer a good portion of their lands in Anatolia, and along the way, they even captured Jerusalem and the Levant, establishing various Crusader states in the region. However, the Second Crusade, which came shortly after, which was supposed to capitalize on the First Crusade while defending currently conquered territories from local Muslim kingdoms, ended in a failure for the Christians. And the failure of the Second Crusade would play a role in the fall of Jerusalem sometime later to the Sultan of Ayyubid Egypt named Saladin. And that led to the Third Crusade, which is probably the most famous one due to the epic battles fought between the English king Richard the Lionheart and Saladin. And while the Third Crusade saw some success, as Richard defeated Saladin in multiple major battles, it ultimately came up short because only the cities of Acre and Jaffa were reconquered, while Jerusalem and many other important regions in the area were still in Muslim hands. And while the Byzantine Empire and Crusaders were technically allies, there was still constant mistrust between the two, stemming all the way back from the East-West schism, and the fact that the Byzantine emperors offered little support in terms of military aid, which diminished over time after the First Crusade. And the Byzantines even saw the Western Crusaders as brutal barbarians because when the Crusaders made their way through Byzantine territory into the Middle East, they even pillaged various Byzantine-held villages and even on the outskirts of Constantinople itself at certain points. While the Crusaders themselves, due to their Catholicism in the West, which differed from the Byzantine orthodoxy in the East, they viewed the Byzantines as untrustworthy due to their limited support and negative diplomatic and religious relations. And these religious tensions became even worse during the massacre of the Latins in 1182 AD, which was a massacre of Roman Catholic inhabitants in Constantinople, which was supposedly perpetrated by the last emperor of the Komnenoi dynasty, Andronikos Komnenos. Meanwhile, in the west, the Republic of Venice, which came to prominence during this time, eyed the city of Constantinople, which controlled the lucrative trade routes from west to east, with envy. So, with all of that in mind, let's actually begin our story now. In 1198, the current Pope, Innocent III, decided to call for a Fourth Crusade, which had the objective of recapturing Jerusalem. But the timing for this new crusade wasn't great because the monarchs of Western Europe's major powers, which were England, France, the Holy Roman Empire, and the various kingdoms in Spain, they were all fighting their own wars with each other or dealing with internal conflicts. Richard the Lionheart, the famous king from the Third Crusade, had pledged one day to return to the Middle East and retake Jerusalem to finish the job, but he died fighting on campaign in France. But despite this, crusades didn't always require kings to campaign because a large number of noblemen around Europe who were not preoccupied opted to join the new crusade. And these included prominent lords from northern France like Baldwin of Flanders and Simon de Montfort. The leader of this new crusade would be a wealthy Italian nobleman whose family included many crusaders named Marquis Boniface of Montferrat. Thus, by 1202, the new crusader army decided to set sail from the port of Venice to Egypt, which would serve as a staging ground for the reconquest of Jerusalem. However, the Venetians saw here an opportunity to make money since the Crusaders did not have a navy of their own, and they insisted that the Crusaders buy their 240 ships that they would need to transport troops for the price of 85,000 silver marks. This was actually double the income of the Kingdom of France during this time, so it was very much a stretch. And the Crusaders refused this because the price was very appalling, obviously. However, the Doge, the leader of Venice, Enrico Dandolo was his name, offered another deal. If the Crusaders reconquered the city of Zara for the Venetians, then Venice would offer passage through their ships and even offered 50 warships of the crusade for their own, while in return the Crusaders would give Venice half of any territory conquered. Now, the city of Zara had once been a subject of the Venetians, but had since then defected to the Kingdom of Hungary, while also winning the protection of the Pope because they were a Catholic city. Thus, with the help of the Crusaders, Venice sought to take it back. The Crusaders and Venetians thus began boarding their ships. The Venetians had designed and built a fleet for the Crusaders consisting of 50 amphibious transports, 100 horse carriers, and 60 warships. The transports, about 30 meters long, 9 meters wide, and 12 meters high, with a crew of 100, could carry up to 600 infantry each, and the horse carriers had specifically designed slings for horses and fold-out ramps below the waterline, allowing mounted knights to charge directly onto the shore. Venetian warships, powered by 100 oarsmen each, featured metal-tipped rams and carried over 300 siege weapons. So, thus, the Venetian fleet, led by Doge Enrico Dandolo, left the harbor on the 1st of October, heading towards Istria, imposing Venetian control over the local port cities. And most of the Crusader forces departed Venice on the 8th of October, and the two armies met near Pulla and sailed together towards Zara. Doge Dandolo intended to stay in Zara over the winter. On the eve of St. Martin's Day, the fleet arrived at Zara, and the attack began with an amphibious landing, followed by a brief siege. Despite Zara's defensive chains and booms across its harbor, the Crusaders broke through and landed their troops and equipment, setting up camp near the city. Citizens of Zara displayed flags with crosses on the walls, signifying their Christian faith, and because of this, some of the Crusader leaders, including Simon de Montfort, Robert de Broves, and Guy of Vaux de Cernay, refused to participate in the siege and requested that the city be spared. Guy of Vaux de Cernay, on behalf of the Pope, even read a letter forbidding the conquest of the city since it was Christian. However, most of the Crusaders still sided with Dandolo and Boniface of Montferrat, who wanted to attack the city, while those refusing to participate decided to just camp somewhere else. And on the 13th of October, the siege engines were placed and used to bombard the walls of Zara. And the city fell on the 24th of November 1202, foreshadowing the later siege of Constantinople. Most of Zara's population fled to Nin, Beograd, or some of the surrounding islands, because those who didn't flee were subject to the things that played out when a typical crusader sack of a city, such as killing, looting, raping, and pillaging. When Pope Innocent III found out about the sack of Zara, he excommunicated the Crusaders and the Venetians, but a lot of the leaders of the Crusade decided to hide this information from the main army so that they wouldn't get abandoned. And the goal for the Crusade to reconquer Jerusalem was still unfulfilled, so the Pope would shortly after lift this excommunication. And thus, the Crusade would continue. But now we need to look at the state of the Byzantine or the Eastern Roman Empire during this particular time, since it will play very importantly into our story. As mentioned before, the Komnenos dynasty had overseen a period of Byzantine revanchism, reconquering many lost territories in Anatolia alongside the Crusaders. But during this time, the Komnenoi Emperor Andronikos Komnenos had been deposed by a certain Isaac II Angelos, who started the new Angelos dynasty. And Isaac II was a very unpopular ruler because he kind of surrounded himself with, the usual low lives of society, like slaves, mistresses, flatterers, basically the worst of the worst. And he also squandered much of the money that was remade during the Komnenoi dynasty. And Isaac II would also lose many lands of the Byzantine Empire, which had been reconquered by the Komnenos in previous years. And he also had to deal with various usurpers and pretenders who sought to overthrow him, as per most Roman emperors. And during the time of the Third Crusade, Isaac II had also fought a number of skirmishes against the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa when he marched through Byzantine territory on his way to the Middle East. But Isaac II didn't really fare well in these engagements. His reign also included frequent campaigns with minimal gains against Bulgaria and other surrounding enemies. And when Isaac II's forces were defeated by the Bulgarians at the Battle of Arcadiopolis, his older brother Alexios III Angelos ends up deposing and blinding Isaac II and putting him in prison. Now, how does this play in? Coming back to the Crusaders, after the fall of Zara, the Crusaders still had the goal of reaching Jerusalem, but the mutual suspicion between Catholic Crusaders and Orthodox Byzantines meant that the road to Jerusalem would not really be as easy due to the previous clashes and broken treaties. And Doge Enrico Dandolo of Venice still wanted his republic to be dominant in trade, and was also probably still bitter about being expelled from Constantinople when he served there as an ambassador many years ago. There are even some rumors that the reason why Dandolo was partially blind was because a Roman emperor or Byzantine emperor blinded him, although those were likely just rumors, and the truth was he may have just sustained an injury. But in any case, in the meantime, remember Isaac II Angelos, the deposed emperor? Well, he had a son named Alexios IV Angelos. Well, I know he has the same name as his usurper uncle. Many of the emperors do. But during this time, the young Alexios IV had been in exile, and he was trying to seek help by taking back the throne of the Byzantine Empire. And it was during this time Alexios IV came into contact with some of the leaders of the Crusade, such as Boniface of Montferrat and Enrico Dandolo. Alexios IV offered 10,000 Byzantine loyalists who would help fight the Crusade, and 20 ships of the Byzantine navy, as well as money to help the Crusaders pay off their debt to Venice. And he even offered to bring the Eastern Church under the Pope, if the Crusaders and Venetians agreed to help him retake his throne in Constantinople. Boniface of Montferrat, Enrico Dandolo, and many other leaders of the Crusade agreed to that plan, their motives stemming from money and wealth that could be gained from taking Constantinople, Catholic supremacy over the Eastern Church, or even revenge on the Byzantines for their previous unreliability in the Crusades, drove many of the Crusaders from Jerusalem to Constantinople. However, there were some notable leaders who refused to participate in this, seeing it was sacrilegious and total diversion to the original plan. And this included Simon of Montfort, who had also refused to participate in the siege of Zara, and Simon would thus leave the crusading party and make his own way to the Middle East through Hungary. Nevertheless, the Crusaders marched on Constantinople on the 24th of June in 1203. Their force had around 4,500 knights, 14,000 infantry, 20 to 30,000 Venetians, and then the 10,000 Byzantine loyalists of Alexios IV. The Crusaders first attacked the Byzantine garrison at Galata by the Golden Horn, which was the massive chain that blocked the harbor of Constantinople that protected the city. The Crusaders then built siege engines to attack the Theodosian walls, which had been almost built centuries ago by the Roman Emperor Theodosius II and was viewed as pretty much almost impregnable until, later on the Ottomans broke through it with literal modern cannons. However, the Byzantine usurper emperor Alexios III, upon hearing of the Crusaders' arrival, had fled the city to the nearby Adrianople, the site of many ancient battles and many future battles to come. However, he was captured by Boniface of Montferrat and subsequently ransomed. Meanwhile, the Crusaders under Enrico Dandolo scaled the walls of Constantinople, capturing a major portion of the city and setting it on fire, leaving 20,000 people homeless. Yeah, that's real. With the emperor overthrown and the city now in the hands of the Crusaders, they installed Alexios IV back to the throne and brought out his blind father Isaac II to rule alongside him. However, while Alexios IV was restored to the throne as the emperor alongside his father, they were both deeply unpopular amongst the general Byzantine population and even the nobility, especially due to the presence of the Crusader and Venetian armies at Constantinople. And these factors would lead a usurper known as Alexios V Ducas Murtzouphilus, as we will call him, to declare that he would defend the city against the Crusaders and that Alexios IV and his father were illegitimate, but technically they were all usurpers in the end. Rallying his supporters anyway, he seized the throne swiftly and killed Alexios IV and his father Isaac II in January 1204 and declared himself the emperor, and Murtzouphilus would strengthen the walls and raid the Crusaders, who were encamped just outside Constantinople in the aftermath of these events. Now, the rise of Murtzouphilus created a problem. Since the Crusader-backed emperors Isaac II and Alexios IV were dead, and there was a hostile usurper, the Crusaders were now just stuck in Constantinople without any form of payment for their services, because they still needed the money and the ships to finish the crusade and pay back the Venetians, and now that Alexios IV was dead, that agreement was also pretty much dead in the water. And thus for many of them, including Enrico Dandolo and Boniface of Montferrat and Baldwin of Flanders, taking Constantinople was the best available option. Thus, on the 9th of April 1204, the Crusaders launched a full-out assault on the Theodosian walls, but were repelled by the Byzantines. However, when the Crusaders attacked the weaker sea walls of the harbor by targeting two towers by lashing their ships together and ramming them repeatedly, the Byzantines put up stalwart resistance, but the Crusaders would smash through the city's gates, rampaging through the streets of the great city of Constantinople, burning down homes, defiling religious sites, and massacring the inhabitants. The usurper emperor Murtzouphilus fled to Thrace, and in the aftermath there were 3 days of looting, where artworks were destroyed or stolen and religious relics taken west. Most famously, the Four Horses of St. Mark, originally a Roman monument depicting chariot racing, was taken by the Venetians and placed on St. Mark's Basilica in Venice, where it remains to this day. You can actually go visit it, and you'll see it. So that's the story behind those horses. You're welcome. The aftermath of the sack of Constantinople in the Fourth Crusade changed the shape of this region forever. The so-called Partitio Romanae Treaty, in Latin, or literally the Partition of Rome, carved up the territories of the Byzantine Empire amongst the Crusaders and Venetians. Venice would receive 3/8 of Constantinople, the Ionian Islands, Crete, Euboea, Andros, Naxos, and a lot of other important port and island locations vital for trade and naval dominance in the region. And with these new territories, Venice would now dominate the Mediterranean trade for centuries to come. And in the core of the Byzantine territories in Constantinople and its surroundings, a new Latin empire was established as a Roman successor state under the Catholic Church, and Count Baldwin of Flanders was crowned as its first emperor in the Hagia Sophia. And his empire consisted of 5/8 of Constantinople, as well as Thrace, parts of Asia Minor, and other regions in Greece. Meanwhile, Boniface of Montferrat would take over Thessalonica in Greece, forming a new kingdom there subservient to the Latin Empire. Other crusaders took over regions like Achaia in the Peloponnese and southern Greece, carving out their own duchies. But what remained of the Byzantine Empire existed in the Empire of Nicaea, which established itself in Anatolia. And other claimants to the Byzantine Empire included Epirus and the coastal empire of Trebizond, led by descendants of the old Komnenos dynasty from decades ago. While Nicaea would actually retake Constantinople decades later under the future emperor Michael VIII Palaeologus, the damage was done, and the empire ceased to be a dominant power again, continuing to face internal strife and foreign invasion that gradually chipped away at its territories and would lead to its collapse about 2 centuries later when the Ottomans took over Constantinople in 1453. But none of that would have happened if it wasn't for the Fourth Crusade, because the Fourth Crusade allowed for various Turkic tribes to flood into Anatolia in the aftermath. Meanwhile, Dandolo, the Doge of Venice, would die only a year after the sack of Constantinople and was buried in the Hagia Sophia, ironically. Count Baldwin of Flanders ruled over a Crusader state, the Latin Empire, surrounded by hostile Byzantines and Bulgarians, and he would eventually be executed after being defeated in an ambush by Callian, the ruler of Bulgaria, at the Battle of Adrianople. Boniface of Montferrat, the leader of the Fourth Crusade, would be killed in an ambush by the Wallachians, who served the Bulgarian ruler, his head being sent to Callian, who raided into the Latin Empire's territories with impunity and dubbed himself as the Roman Slayer. Simon of Montfort, who had abandoned the Fourth Crusade, would have a distinguished career as a commander in Western Europe, fighting in the Albigensian Crusade in southern France against the Cathars, though he would be killed in the siege of Toulouse. Whatever happened next in the Crusades were a direct result of the Fourth Crusade, which undermined confidence in the very idea of crusading itself, as it ended up sacking the greatest city of Christendom and led to the collapse of Christianity's defense in the East. While there were more Crusades to come, they all proved pretty much fruitless in the end, as support for the Crusades would kind of dwindle after each failure. And in the end, the Fourth Crusade can be remembered as an event that really shouldn't have happened, and only happened due to miscommunication, greed, jealousy, geopolitics, Byzantine court intrigue, and really the only true benefactor of the Fourth Crusade was Venice. And with that in mind, thank you for turning in today for my podcast. And this is your host, Anthony Tran, and I will see you in the next one.